Hey everyone, it's Allie, and let's talk about some updates to Gas Arrow Deadeye. First, I want to say I'm a little bit sick, so I'm sorry if I sound bad, but it is what it is. I got to get through it and still give you guys an update. We are going to be talking about 3 things today. First, we're going to talk about some gem changes, as we found some really key interactions we can add to our build. Second, we're going to be talking about mana and how to solve it, as we found a pretty decent solution for it. And third, we're going to talk about gear for the end game and what you should be looking for to buy yourself as starter upgrades as you get yourself into maps. Go over the first point. We have made some very minor changes to our skill gems, which actually make our build a decent bit tankier. And all of this will of course be updated in the mobile fire link below as well if you want a static place to look at all of the gem changes. First, we have moved our vitality, our cannibalism, and our clarity onto our Herald of Ash. What we learned is that the reduced reservation of Herald skills actually applies onto anything that is linked to it, because these aren't their own skills or their own gems. They are simply buffs that are applied onto the Herald itself, meaning that if you have these 3 nodes picked up, we can run all 3 of these and actually still have a little bit of spirit left over. It's a really key interaction, so I recommend putting your vitality, cannibalism, and your clarity on your Herald of Ash. And what that allows us to do is allows us to open up some space on our Wind Dancer to put in a pin, a lockdown, and with a 3rd socket, a wind wave. Pin and lockdown are going to make it so every time Wind Dancer procs, which happens if you ever get hit by a melee attack, it will also pretty much guarantee roots whatever hits you, giving you a little bit of a buffer before they start running at you again. We're also adding in Wind Wave, which makes it so if you ever get stunned while using a supported skill, given it works with Wind Dancer, that means at all times, so whenever you get stunned, you automatically knock back enemies a little bit away from you, and given that that's a hit as well, it should also benefit from Pin and Lockdown, meaning that if you ever just get hit, or if you ever get stunned, you do a knockback AoE around you that roots things in place. Very cute interaction, and I really like it. And there's potential for us to even potentially add in a fire exposure here as our 5th and 6th links to potentially get even more out of our Wind Dancer later on. I also want to mention that I highly encourage you to go get some Gem Cutter Prisms and to use them on your Wind Dancer to get 20% quality. This gives you 1 additional maximum sages on it, making it give you 20% more evasion rating in comparison to what the buff normally gives you. It is by far the single best use of our quality and is definitely worth the few exalted for some Gem Cutter Prisms. Finally, the last thing that we changed was the addition of inspiration onto our Gas Arrow. This is going to lead us into the second thing that we want to talk about today, which is going to be mana. And we found that inspiration is highly crucial for us to be able to sustain our mana as well. Welcome to Path of Exile 2, and currently every single build that is on Stormweaver is having some sort of mana problem. We had it good as Stormweavers, and we never noticed that because we had so much mana regen, but currently every single build is struggling for mana, especially given that Mana Leech was made substantially weaker than it was in Path of Exile 1. So we are going to be tackling this mana problem from a few different angles. As I mentioned, we're going to get inspiration on our Gas Arrow. It's completely okay because it just does so much damage anyways that it's completely fine to run a link that doesn't give us any damage. And then we are also going to be coming over to Passage and picking up ourselves Mental Toughness, which gives us some mana regen and reduce our mana costs, assuming we're not below 35% mana. And we're also going to be picking up Manifold Method, which gives us 50% increased Mana Leech. What we're going to be doing in the late game is we are going to heavily rely on Mana Leech to help us through the majority of the mana issues that we have. To do this, we are going to have to get ourselves a few things. First off, there is no Elemental Leech in the game, at least there's very few sources of it. So we are going to have to rely on Physical Leech instead. That means we need to get ourselves a physical attack damage Leech's mana roll somewhere on our gear. For me, I opted to get this on my gloves, and we'll talk more about this in the gear section after this. Or you can also get the same roll on your bow instead, but I don't recommend that as that might make it a little bit pricier and it's just easier to get on your gloves. You also potentially find it on rings, and honestly, the more of this stat that you have, the better it does, as you are going to be gaining a portion of your physical damage as mana, meaning the more of it you have it, the more of each hit that you get back. You might be asking yourself, Allie, aren't we a fire build? How does this actually work? How do we do physical damage? And well, that is simply going to be done through just how Gas Arrow itself works. Gas Arrow is a 3-part skill. The arrows themselves, which are the physical projectiles that go and spawn the poison clouds, the poison clouds themselves, which are completely irrelevant for our build, and then finally the explosion, which does fire damage, is where all of our damage comes from. This explosion converts your physical damage into fire damage, but I need to point out here that this doesn't mean we can get something like percent physical damage, scale the physical damage that we do, and then convert to fire, and then scale again off of any percent fire damage. as that is not how conversion works anymore in Path of Exile 2. But because the arrows themselves do not convert anything, that means that the arrows just simply do whatever damage you have either on your bow or whatever damage you have on all of your other gear. That means we can now swap over to a physical bow, have all that be converted into fire, so it's the same thing as running a fire bow for the sake of the explosion, and then have a big meaty physical hit on the arrow itself to leech off of. The arrow itself still does a decent amount of damage, as it's 226% of attack damage, while the explosion is 283, so it's not that far off the explosion damage. It should give us a decent amount of mana leech. I do want to say that this will only get stronger the better your bow is, as the higher the fizz DPS on your bow, the more fizz damage you do, thus the more you leech, but you can also circumvent that by getting more leech rolls on your gear to increase how much of that damage is being converted to mana leech anyways. On my gloves, I have 4.82%, so if I were to just get another 5% on a ring, I'd effectively double my mana leech, but if I were to try to double the DPS of my bow, I would have to pay hundreds of exalteds for that, meaning you're most likely better off trying to chase down 1 or 2 additional mana rolls if you feel like your leech isn't enough. This is all going to be dependent on how good of a bow you have, so I'm most likely going to recommend for you here to try and get yourself at least 2 physical attack damage leeches mana rolls on your gear to make it feel super comfortable. But between the little bit of mana regen that we have, inspiration, mental toughness, and the leech from a physical bow, that should pretty much take care of all of your mana problems for the foreseeable future. The final thing I want to cover in this video is going to be all of the gear and some trade links for you to actually be able to go and buy both a bow and gloves like I mentioned, but also a trade link for every other slot of gear so you can just go and get yourself some early game upgrades. What I mentioned about all these links, which will be linked in the description below, is that they're very easy to customize for whatever budget level that you currently are at. For example, if you only want to spend 20 exalted orbs on a bow, you can come down to the buyout price and the filters, set a maximum to 20 and then set it to exalted orbs, and then you will not be able to see any bow that costs more than 20 exalted. I am unfortunately sorry, as the trade website is currently barely working as I'm recording this, so it's really hard to show you an exact example, but to be able to find yourself a good bow, you would just come to this link and then you'd click the physical damage number in the bottom left of each bow that you're looking for to filter them by price, and then simply try to window shop for one that you like. Ideally on this bow, we want it to be a dual string bow for the +1 arrow implicit, and then we want an additional arrow as one of the suffixes, but after that, the only thing you really care about is just getting as much physical DPS on the bow as possible. If you can get yourself a little bit of fire damage on there, that's fine too, as that is just as good. But any sort of lightning or cold, while it's fine, won't be as optimal as you getting physical and fire damage on there. Some other really nice stats for you to look for would be something like attack speed, as attack speed feel great. I'm not necessarily sure how I feel about crit chance right now, as I don't know if we're going to be going crit late game or not. But if you were to find a bow with crit chance on it, for example, it wouldn't be too bad of a stat for you to get. For your quiver, again, you can do the same thing where you can filter based off of price if you want to find yourself a cheap one. But ideally, what we're going to want to look for here is going to be a prime quiver for the attack speed implicit. And then there's just quite a few other good stats on here, such as added damage, damage of bow skills, and potentially things like projectile skills. This link is going to come with a little sum button, which I can't click because currently the trade website is barely working. But if you were to click on this, it would then filter all these quivers with the ones that give you the most added damage be filtered towards the top, so you can potentially find the quote-unquote best quiver. There are quite a lot of interesting stats to look for on a quiver, so use your best judgment and find something that is reasonable for you in both terms of price and in terms of stats on it. For our body armor, what we're going to be focusing on this body armor is going to be quite simple. We need to get ourselves a body armor with a decent life roll on it, and most importantly, as much evasion rating as possible, as we need to get a lot of evasion rating for acrobatics and bestial skin, which doubles the evasion rating of our body armor, so it's worth to invest a little bit more into it. For your body armor, what you'd want to do is to click the evasion rating number at the bottom, which then filter all of them by the highest evasion rating possible. And if you can find yourself one with maybe some resistances on it, that would be a great purchase. I personally got myself one with life and 1.5k evasion rating, so I'd say anything around 1.2 to 1.5k evasion rating is pretty good as a cheap 5 exalted or so chestplate. For your boots, what we're looking for is pretty much the same thing, just life, movement speed, and any sort of resistance as possible. So feel free to do some window shopping here, and if you are looking for more resistances, click the sum button again, as it will filter all of them by amount of resistance on them. For gloves, there are quite a lot of very good stats here, but ideally we'd want to try to get as much added damage as we can on the prefixes, any sort of resistance possible. Rarity, because rarity is actually a great stat for us to look for, as it gives us more loot, and at a minimum you will need the mana leech roll either on here or on your rings. For the belts, there really aren't many good stats on a belt, unfortunately, so just a simple belt with life and as many resistances as possible would be great. And again, you'll have a sum button for you to click for you to be able to filter everything based off how much resistance it has. For rings, there's actually quite a lot of different ways you can go about it. You try to find yourself a ring with some leech on it to help with your leech problems. You can try to find yourself some added damage on there. or you could just get yourself a ring with a bunch of life and resistances to be able to round out your resistances for now. Resistances are going to be by far the biggest problem that we're going to have walking into endgame. So for now, most of our focus is going to specifically go towards trying to fix that issue. And then finally for amulet, it's going to be exactly the same as a ring, as any sort of amulet with anything interesting on it, such as percent maximum life or additional gem levels, is just going to be a little bit too expensive for us to afford as a starter necklace. As long as you utilize these sum buttons on all of these trade searches to kind of filter out to the best options, and as long as you remember to put a filter on every item to cap the price of them at whatever you're willing to spend, you should have a pretty easy time finding some gear from all these trade searches and get yourself a decent set of gear to get you going into mapping. If you have any questions on any of this, feel free to leave a comment in the comments below, and I'd be more than happy to help you as soon as I can. I also stream on Twitch every single day, so feel free to come by Twitch and ask me any of your questions there. And with that, I hope you kitties are enjoying the build. I know myself and quite a lot of people on Twitch are having fun, and I can't wait to see you guys tomorrow for another update on the build. With all that said, I hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll see you all in the next video.